should we test the paper or anything, or is it difficult? I have it here.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second talk of our day. We have Swaminathan from Visai Games. He is the creative genius behind the award-winning the award-winning game Venba, which also won a BAFTA for the best debut. So can we welcome him with a round of applause? Thank you.
Hello, hello. Can you all hear me? Hi. Super excited to be here at IGDC and meet all of you. So my talk is called Incomplete Recipes for Success. I'm calling it a Venba Postmortem. So my name is Abhi. I am the creative director and designer and writer at a studio called Visai. And it's based in Toronto. We are about 3 to 4 people big. And our first game was Venba that launched last year. So what is Venba? Venba is a narrative cooking game where you play as an Indian immigrant mother who moves to Canada in the late 1980s with her family. In her travel to Canada, her recipe book gets damaged, and as a result, the player has to restore these lost recipes while exploring the story about this family. The game explores the relationships within this family and how it grows and changes over time. And for me, one of the things that I focused on was to differentiate it from other cooking games. The unique mechanic is these lost recipes. And for me, it gave me a chance to focus on South Indian recipes and make the gameplay laser focused on getting the players to learn about these recipes and understand why it works the way it works. But this neatly packaged pitch that I'm telling you right now, that's not how Venba started, right? Venba started with just an idea. Growing up in Canada, there's a lot of diaspora media about assimilated children and the struggles they have with their immigrant parents. But I felt like that was not doing justice to the parents' side itself. And while the children's challenges are very valid, leaving behind a country in the 1980s especially and taking a huge gamble and moving to a different country is extremely challenging and sometimes very lonely and isolating. So I wanted to tell the story of Venba, a mom who's trying to connect with her son, and she has a very real barrier, a language barrier with her son. And this is inspired by a lot of the South Asian families I've seen in Canada. And the idea of telling the story through cooking and framing it as a cooking game was very exciting for me, because I feel like that's not something that was done at that point. So it was very exciting, and I thought like I had a really cool idea. And I think basically a lot of us indie developers are in this cool idea point, right? We've all been here, but we don't know how to move on from here, right? So, and especially for me, I've already been in the cool idea phase a couple different times before. So I would come up with something that's very exciting that I can't sleep, but I would make it, and for some reason or the other, it wouldn't quite work. And because I've done this enough times, by the time I had the idea for Venba, I was convinced that this is my last chance. Every year I'm like, oh, I'm turning 26. If I don't make it in the game industry, I'm going to quit. And then I'll be 26. Then I'll be like, I'm going to wait till I turn 27. And it just kept happening. So with Venba, it really felt like the last chance for me. And I wanted to make sure that it got all the chances that it could possibly get. But I was an outsider to the video game industry. I worked in a mobile game company, and as a result, I didn't quite understand what was needed to make a successful game. So that meant that my lunchtime, I was just consuming like every single resource that's online and available. And everybody has like really strong opinions about how to make games that sell well and are successful, right? And similarly, I've also learned a lot of lessons from my previous games that I've released and not done super well. So with all of this in mind, I started to come up with somewhat of an idea, and I knew that I had to come up with a cool idea. I knew that I had to pitch it to publishers to get funding, and I knew that something marketing needs to happen. I need to tell people about the game, and I also knew that hopefully if all of these things were done right, it will eventually lead into a successful game. My goal with Venba was very singularly focused. All I wanted to do was to make a game that leads us to making other games so that I can do game development full time. And to me, this idea is where we all start with. This incomplete recipe for success is what we all have. And I think depending on the idea and your journey, it's up to you to like fill in the gaps yourselves. When thinking about like what kind of talk to give you guys, I thought I should be very transparent and share my journey about how filling in these steps were, and be honest about what's worked for me and what's not worked for me, and maybe those are things you can find useful. So the first step, come up with a cool idea, we did that. So the second one was pitching to publishers, right? And every resource that I consumed, they were very, very clear that come up with a vertical slice, come up with a beautiful pitch, and send it to the publishers, and I guess wait for a response. And that's how most of the conventional advice went on the internet. But I had already done that with my previous games, and for me, I had a bigger problem. It was hard for that email to even get opened. So when I put myself in the publisher's shoes, I realized that they must be getting hundreds and hundreds of these emails every single week, right? So I needed to do something different. I needed to get noticed even before I sent this email, right? But conventionally what people say is like, oh, go to networking, go to events. But I had a full-time job that's irrelevant to video games, and I was in Canada where it's not really privy to a lot of these publisher-focused events. So my only weapon was like social media. So with that, I started tweeting. As soon as I started developing Venba, I started tweeting. Anytime we made the most minuscule progress, I would start tweeting about it, posting it online, and was already getting a lot of traction. And that was validating, but I needed to grow more and more. So then I noticed that every time a big account, like a big developer account, retweeted us, we would get a lot of attention. So then my entire strategy was just like waiting for a big developer to say something like, hey, indie devs, what are you working on? And then I'll be right there in the replies with like my GIF. And I'll be like, hey, look at this is what I'm working on. And they would have no choice but to like, retweet or engage with it in some way. But not only was this validating, because they were almost all the time this worked, but not only was this validating that the idea was cool, it was also getting noticed by more and more people as it went on. And then finally, the biggest breakthrough for us, there was this online competition called #PitchYaGame. And this still happens. I think it happens in Blue Sky now. And the idea is that developers can tweet out their entire game as a pitch. And actual publishers will like weigh in and like respond and like evaluate your pitch. Not for funding, but just like for feedback. And it's meant to be very sportive for indie developers. This felt like the chance I was waiting for. So I was up all night. I was getting all my materials ready. I scheduled a tweet for like 7 a.m. I went to bed, and when I woke up, it was doing really, really well. And we actually ended up winning this competition. And as a result, a lot of publishers would would have to respond and were like, oh, this is cool, these are the things you could improve on and stuff like that. And I immediately seized on that chance, and I was like, that's great, I would love to improve on that. Can I send you the pitch when I do improve on it, right? And once again, they had no choice but to say yes. So this gave me an in, and I'm no longer cold emailing, right? And similarly, all the bigger developers that I spoke to, sometimes they would reach out and be like, oh, this game idea, it's very cool, I want to support it. What do you guys need? And I'll almost always respond with like, hey, we're trying to get it funded with this publisher or that publisher. Do you have somebody you can introduce me to? And if that developer has worked with that publisher, I would ask for that specific contact. And they would introduce me. And the strategy worked so well that in 1 week, this publisher that I really wanted, 5 different people emailed the same guy in the same week. So that guy had to meet with me just because he was just like very curious of like what's happening. Yeah, so we had a vertical slice. People were already expecting us to pitch to them. So we knew that the email was going to get noticed. And we had a beautiful pitch deck and everything, right? So how did the actual pitching process go? It didn't go quite well. We had a lot of rejections. We were trying to pitch for about 6 months straight, and we've talked to maybe dozens and dozens of publishers, and pretty much everybody boiled down to the same point. They said, it's a visual novel, it's a cooking game, is there really a market for something like that on Steam? They were worried about the feasibility, the commercial feasibility of a game like Venba. This was quite a blow, and I couldn't point to like any similar games that already existed and be like, oh, look, that game did well, and Venba is similar to that game, so we will also do well, right? And while I understood why this happened, it still was very disillusioning because I put a lot of effort into like getting these pitches even noticed. But it felt like this is as far as I could go. So for me, it was quite heartbreaking. And I had been working on this game like weeknights and weekends. So I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer either. So we weren't quite sure what to do about this. And that's when, in the November of 2020, Wholesome Games reached out to us, and they were like, hey, your game is really cool. We're doing a showcase. Do you want to be part of it? And if you do, send us the 30-second trailer. And I said yes, but we were at the point when we were changing the game quite a bit. So the art style changed, the character design changed. As a result, we didn't have gameplay to show, but I still said yes anyway. And then in 3 weeks, me and the artist, we made this trailer for Venba and was showed in the Wholesome Games showcase. The thing is, every single shot you see from this trailer is not in the final game. Nothing made it, right? But I still think this is a really good trailer for Venba because it conveys the player promise quite well. It gets the idea across. It is a narrative cooking game. And when I made the trailer, honest to God, I thought these were going to make it. But what we didn't expect was the trailer to go viral on the showcase, right? So as soon as that happened, we were blowing up on Twitter. We had an insane number of wish lists, and we made a lot of end-of-the-year lists. And it was very, 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 very validating, and it really opened doors for us. And suddenly, within a few weeks, we also got emails from Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, and they all wanted Venba on their platforms. And surprise, surprise, a lot of the publishers who rejected us were now suddenly feeling that Venba wasn't quite risky. So here's my learnings from that whole pitching process. I think first and foremost, what was considered the weakness for Venba by publishers ended up being the strength for it. Its uniqueness and the novel concept went a long way in supporting it. That's why, whether it's the Twitter reactions or the trailer reactions, every single way, we just had to rely on the fact that if we get it in front of people's eyes, people will like it. And secondly, my strategy of getting on the publisher's radar before you cold email them, before you pitch them, also ended up working really well, even though we finally did go in the self-publishing route, because we were able to secure enough funds from Game Pass and console porting funds that we actually went from needing a publisher to not needing a publisher. It's still the farthest that I've gotten in that space. So I think definitely, if you guys, especially living in India, if you're trying to reach for publishers in North America or in the West, I would say your beautiful pitch deck, your beautiful vertical slice that you're putting a lot of effort into, they need to be ready for it even before you email them somehow. And the third thing I learned is that publishers act more like VCs. And this is, I don't know why I had this belief, but I kind of expected publishers to be more creative partners and who can see the game for what it is and not what it currently is, like what it can be. But I think publishers are more closer to VCs, right? They want surefire hits and they want to reduce risk. And I think Venba at the time, we hadn't done enough to show that we have reduced the risk. So the trailer response proved that there was a market for a game like this. And I think our vertical slice itself could have been better. We built it part-time with no money, and it shows, right? So I think those things, if I knew, if I had known then, I would have put a lot more effort in and made a vertical slice that blew them away. But once again, you can also fake an entire trailer and hope it works out. So if I had to fill in my splotchy point about pitching, this is how I'd fill it in. So the next point is make the cool idea into a cool game somehow. So this is where I ran into a lot of challenges with designing Venba. So the main mechanic of Venba is this recipe thing that's incomplete, right? And I really like this idea because it differentiated it from other cooking games on the market. And also, like games like Cooking Mama, I felt were very arcadey focused. And for the kind of emotional story that we're telling, we needed a different way to interact with the cooking elements. And secondly, I also thought doing this kind of incomplete thing, the idea of Venba restoring these lost recipes that are important to her is a way she's preserving her culture and language that's very important to her. So it like primarily whatever the protagonist is feeling, we're making the player feel that too. The problem with that though is that our recipes look like this. And this is not even the steps, this is just the ingredient list, right? So it was very overwhelming to try to convert this into like authentic recipes, and I refused to like simplify them because I wanted, like more than anything, I didn't want misinformation to come from this game. So to start with, my initial designs for Venba was I would get actual recipes and put them on a Word document and actually splotch it out on like Paint or something, and then try to make a puzzle out of it. And technically, you could call them puzzles, but they weren't very fun. And like, imagine as a player, you're opening this and you're seeing this wall of text. That's enough to turn you off immediately, right? So that was a huge problem, and I didn't know how to solve this without compromising on the authenticity. But this commitment to authenticity started to get out of hand. So, you know, all our kitchens, we have stove on one side, and then we have the countertop on the other side. And I was like, I need to make it feel really like a home, right? And the problem is, when you have the stove on one side, there's a wasted space, and obviously in the final game, there's a portable stove, but I didn't want to do that in the beginning. That solution was right there, but I was like, it's not authentic. So this is the earlier prototype where the players had to switch between the countertop and the stove view, and I even messed with designs where like you're cooking, but you're also managing ingredients at the same time. Players did not have fun with this, right? And I knew, like even when designing it, I knew it wouldn't be fun, but I just refused to let go. And this kind of commitment started to harm the game with a lot of its design decisions. And this also extended to the recipes that I actually showed in the game. So Venba is about South Indian cooking, but what South Indian dishes do I show in particular, right? We have so much variety. Every 15 kilometers we travel in this country, the recipe changes. Everybody has very strong opinions about how they make biryani. So it started to get very suffocating about like showing this authentically. And I started to think about like, okay, if I show enough breakfast dishes, am I showing enough dinner dishes? Am I showing like, things that we do for like holidays and festivals, and it started to get impossible because it is. And I realized what I was trying to do is like Venba only has 7 levels, so I'm trying to showcase the entire diversity that we have in our cuisine with just 7 dishes. That's like asking someone to pick 7 words to represent the English language, right? It's just me set up to fail. And the thing is, and this also extended to the story, right? So Venba is very specifically about one thing, this relationship between the mother and the son, and how they grow apart and how they grow close. But there are so many other stories to tell when it comes to the world of South Asian immigrants living in North America. And I started to feel like, well, if I show just this relationship, am I not showing other things? Am I erasing stuff and stuff like that? So really, I think the thing is no one asked for a fully representative game or like a fully, like every dish needs to be represented or anything like that. So this is all self-imposed pressure that I put on myself. But the thing is, when Venba started, I didn't expect it to be as popular as it got. So then I quickly realized Venba might be many people's first introduction to Tamil cuisine and Tamil culture. So then I was like, I have to really make sure that they get it right? But when you're trying to make sure that everybody has the right idea, what you're building is like a tour guide. You're not really building a game. So I had to give up on that mentality. And once I did, and I just embraced what does the game need, right? So like, for example, in the first level, it really makes sense that they're cooking idli as opposed to something like biryani. because specialty stores and stuff like that were much rarer. Like, so for struggling immigrants, it'll be a lot harder to get those specialty spices. And also, like, what kind of dish can they cook depending on what stage they are in the game? These kind of questions are not focusing on anything else but what's needed for the game and what's needed for the story. And this was very freeing. And similarly, to get around the complexity of the recipes problem, I didn't want to compromise on the authenticity still, but what I did was, instead of making the player cook the recipe from start to finish, I would showcase only the parts that I thought was interesting and challenging for the player to cook. Other things would already be prepped ahead. So I would just write around it. I would be like, Venba would say something like, oh, I've prepped this marination ahead. So that would skip like 10 steps, right? So as a result, I was able to keep that compromise. And I'm really happy about how this turned out because there are players who know how to cook, who are familiar with cooking, who are familiar with cooking Indian recipes. And when they play Venba, they have a much easier time. And I'm really happy about that because I think their instincts are getting validated in the game. My favorite example of this is a Tamil YouTuber played the game with his mom. And when she got to the biryani level, she wasn't even clicking on like the memories or whatever. Like he was trying to click on it and she was like, yeah, just put this in that order. And she just solved it. And I was worried because like there might be bugs that happen if you don't solve it in the expected order, right? She was just speed running it. So I think that kind of stuff, that's the balance I wanted to hit, and I'm really happy I did that. So in the initial designs that I was trying to do, where I was trying to chase this kind of authenticity, I realized what I was trying to make is not a cooking game, but a cooking simulator. I think for a game like Venba, that doesn't really fit. What I needed to do was recreate the spirit of cooking, make the player feel like they're cooking, but they don't have to be actually, we don't have to recreate cooking itself with all its mechanics and physics and things like that. And similarly, I think Venba is an introduction to Tamil cuisine, and it's one of many introductions. It is not the introduction, or it's not meant to, necessarily teach you how to make these dishes, right? Just give you a strong idea and hopefully inspire you to seek out how to make these on your own. So my design learnings overall is that game design is a series of compromises. Your perfect vision in your head is only perfect because it's in your head. As soon as you start bringing it to any tangible media, the player is going to have a lot of things to say about it, and you're going to have to compromise. But this compromise is not a bad thing. Ultimately, the game benefits from the abstraction, simplification, and the stylization that it needed to go through. And I think when you're making a game, eventually, it will start to take a life of its own. And when that happens, it will tell you what it needs to be. And you just need to decenter and let your ego go so the game can be what it needs to be. And you should get out of the game's way. OK. So the next point is marketing, right? And I say this as a single word because I think for a lot of indie developers, that's all the word is. They're like, we'll make the game, and we'll hope to God we'll tell people at some point once the game is done. But for Venba, I want to share what our approach was. So first and foremost, I think Venba, we continue to tweet a lot and post on social media. Every single thing was shared, and anything that was made, the entire team, whatever they share, even internal chat messages from the team, if I thought it was funny, it's going to go on Twitter. So we kept posting that, and I also think it played to Twitter's strengths, like colorful, rich images of cooking and food and things like that really helped us propel forward. And then we also branched out to TikTok, where people were already making content about us. So it was very easy to just repost that and then talk about it from our own voice. And there we were able to reach a lot more audiences that we didn't reach through Twitter. And then the other thing that happened that I completely did not expect is, in the 3 years, there was an explosion in the Indian gaming YouTube community, and especially the Tamil YouTube community. So they had found the game all by themselves, and they became like super fans, and they were making so much content. And that's the thing with marketing, right? Like if you leave it until the end or something like that, it doesn't give time for the game to live on its own and for people to find it and discover it and begin like a relationship with it. But they started to become like champions of the game, and they were so hyped for the release and stuff like that. Those are not things I could have even planned. So what is the learning here, right? Am I just saying tweet a lot or post a lot? Yes, but I think it also matters. I think if Venba was a different kind of game, and I was tweeting a lot or posting a lot, I don't think it would have mattered as much. So the thing I want to impress upon all of you is that for me, marketing is game design, and game design is marketing. Marketing starts even before the game's development starts, and this really matters. So suppose you're making a game like Dwarf Fortress, right? Like, or like if this is your first game and you're trying to break into the industry, you have a $0 marketing budget. So all the marketing that you have to rely on comes from organic mechanics in the game. So it's really important that you choose the right game to make for the right team, depending on your goals. If you're making a very systems-heavy, deep game because you're inspired by games like Dwarf Fortress, or or if you're inspired by a platformer or things like that, that's fine. But like understand that the way they do that is by being present in those communities for such a long time. And they slowly grow it, right? So there are some genres that just actively lend itself to good marketing. There are others don't. But Venba, it was specifically what excited me was that I knew that just from the concept and the story, there's a lot of easy marketing gains that we can gain. One of the things that kept giving me confidence is that in Twitter, food images and stuff like that always go viral. Like anime, ASMR, cooking compilation is an evergreen tweet, right? So I knew that if Venba could exist in that space, then we can also capture some of that audience. So I would say and there's even points when I was like, when I was designing the game, I would be like, wait, if I designed it this way, it would make for a good tweet. And that's actually influenced my game design decisions. And I think essentially when you're trying to market the game and when you're trying to design the game, you're kind of solving for the same problem. You are trying to make the game very appealing and efficient and stuff like that. And I think marketing becomes less and less important when you have a following and stuff like that. And that's when you can try a lot more experimental things. But if you are trying to get noticed, I would say really think hard and deep about that. And then the third thing I think really helped Venba is that it's simply a game that people just wanted to talk about. There was something about its concept and premise, the exact kind of things that made it a risk, also made it special. And when you're writing about games, when press people are writing about games, and they're writing about the 5th Souls-like game that came out that month, it's a breath of fresh air for them to write about something like this, right? So it's occupying a space where people, it's not necessarily an obscure indie game, but it's not mega popular either. So it was in that space like, hey, have you heard of this game? You should check it out. And people really wanted to talk about it and support it. So that was really nice. But that being said, I think not all of our marketing was home runs. I think one place where we really could have invested more was community management. We had a lot of fans on social media platforms, but we didn't provide a home for them to meet each other or talk to us. So something like a Discord community where we could run it would have been very, very useful. It's simply because we were an indie team, we were wearing a lot of hats, so it's something that we couldn't take on at the time. But I think we really underestimated the impact of something like that. And also making fan materials, once I saw that the game was successful, getting a lot of attention, doing things like stickers and posters for fans to use, all of that goes a really long way. So I think that's one area we could have definitely improved on. Okay, so that's the marketing blurb. So the last one is profit. So after all of this, after 3 years of on and off game development, quitting my job and starting a company and all of these things, we launched a game, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. The game launched to very positive reviews, and thanks to the PR firms that we worked with, we got a bunch of day one reviews from sites like GameSpot that went live as soon as the game launched. And the reviews were good enough for people to get excited about the game, and there was also a strong word of mouth. And in the first, and also like subsequently what helped with that is also award nominations and award wins. So every time we would get nominated, that would be a big marketing boost. So it became this kind of critical indie darling, and it's something we still benefit from to this day. For example, like nomination for a BAFTA itself was a big marketing beat, but winning the BAFTA was not something we expected. And once again, this is also something that matters, right? Like if your game is unique and small, it might be a niche thing, but it also makes it stand out in these kind of categories. Overall, everything that we thought will work about Venba did work. People had very emotional connections to the game. They resonated with the story. A lot of people cry. A lot of people call their mothers. I had somebody send a close-up photo of their eyes to prove that they were crying after they played the game. So things like that, I think, it was just nice to see. And even now, whenever somebody who hasn't had biryani or dosas or something, and they have had it because of Venba, even till date, I get tagged on those things, oh, I had biryani or I made biryani and stuff like that. So overall, I'm really, really happy with how Venba turned out. So I would say for us, launch-wise, we had strong reviews and sales, and that's something that keeps going till date, and it set us up for our next project really well, and so I'm really happy about that. Word of mouth was very strong, especially from like South Asian communities, but it's just something that people tell other people about, because they go in expecting a very wholesome cooking game, but they don't expect like an emotional gut punch. So that surprise even makes it a talking point. But I think one thing I really regret was not localizing the game. So I think there was some bad advice at the right moment that made us make this decision, but we were running out of money also as we were developing the game. But localization is once again something we underestimated. If your game doesn't sell well, then localization doesn't matter as much. But when it does sell well, it's a big multiplier on top of it, and it really matters. And more than that, I just wanted to reach players that are keen to play Venba that I can't. For some reason, Venba is really popular in Japan, but we don't have Japanese localization. So literally, players are using Google Lens at the TV screen to play it, and I feel really bad about that. I wish we had, and this is something we're investigating now, see if it makes sense for us to do. But yeah, I would definitely try to like assess like global interest in the game before you release, if your game is crossing that threshold. And the other thing I wish I could have done well is I was very like in a hustle mode throughout Venba development, but as soon as Venba launched, I kind of took a seat back and relaxed, maybe a bit too much. But I should have also started marketing efforts for post-launch. But the pre-launch marketing was strong enough that I was able to relax a bit, but I think I should have done things like, do a supercut of all the reactions and see how streamers are reacting to this and stuff like that. Because once you launch the game, that's when you have to convert your wish list and the hype into actual sales, right? So I think I was a bit too relaxed about that. And marketing begins before the game launches. Begins development, but it also doesn't end after the game launches, and I think it's something to keep in mind. So far I've talked about, so to answer the question, Venba was, because of Game Pass and porting funds and stuff like that, Venba was profitable even before it launched, but after launch with Steam and Switch, we were able to make our money back again, and it set the studio up for our next game, which we're very excited about. But that being said, I think throughout this talk, I've talked about things like marketing, things like how to pitch and find funding, and it's very business oriented. But I also want to say that it's also important to have fun while making the game. When I look back at Venba, what I'm really happy about are some moments that I'm sure a lot of players don't know or care about. So for example, this is the dad character from the game. His inspiration, character design, anytime my artist asked anything about him, I would just point to photos of Rajinikanth, who's my favorite actor. So you can see, like, this is a one-to-one shot remake, and like stuff like this is a movie that a lot of young Rajini fans don't even know about, right? So it's deep cuts, and why did I do that? It's just for me, right? It's very self-indulgent, but I had a lot of fun with it. Similarly, this is the biryani level, and you can see that all the spices, when they come in so confidently, and when you pour the oil, it's just eyeballing it. It really indicates how our mothers cook. You know, they don't have measurements for anything, but by contrast, when you cook as Kavin, the son, you can see that the ingredients are like very hesitant to come in, and like he pours the oil like twice because he's not sure. So this kind of storytelling, it's a little expensive, but we invested in these kind of details to like really sell. When I look back at Venba, these are the moments that stand out for me. Oh yeah, this is very obscure. So this is a GIF of the player pouring ghee in the pan, and you'll notice that the ghee is semi-solid. Because in Canada, even in room temperature, most ghee is semi-solid. It's cold enough there. But in India, or in Tamil Nadu at least, depending on the ghee, of course, but it's usually liquid, right? So when we're making this level, I'm like, I'm going to need a new ghee acid. And Sam was like, why? And I explained this reason. And he just looked at me, dead face. It's like, no one's going to notice that. But I will, and I think that's important to me, right? Thank you. And similarly, this scene that you've seen a couple different times, this is also like a shot-for-shot from a different Tamil movie that no one's probably noticed. So once again, why did I do that? Because it's fun. And I think, and there's so many details like this throughout Venba. So if I had to fill in the last point, I would say, like, yes, profit is important, absolutely. Whenever people talk to me about like what game they want to make, the first thing I ask is like, is this game going to make its money back? And I think that's something we should focus on. But at no point in Venba did we do anything where we felt like we were compromising on our vision. In fact, it was the opposite. Like sticking to our vision, sticking to what we thought was special is what ended up working for us. So game development is very hard. There's a lot of late nights I've pulled with Venba. And there are times when you're launching and you're going through certification or you're fixing 10 bugs, and you're coming up with features even though it's code lock. In these times, it's just you and the game, right? So in these times, you have to make sure that it's a game that you want to be alone with. So with Venba, I'm really happy that these are the guesses that we tried and these are the things that worked. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. If you have any questions, yeah, please feel.
Hi, Abhinav this side.
Hi.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for Venba. I think I played it day one on Game Pass back in last year, August. And it's one of the last memories I have with a significant loved one. So it's a very warm experience it was till the end, and I still remember it to this day. One thing I'd like to ask you, actually two questions first. First of all is what made you choose the particular art design or art style that you chose for Venba, and what was that entire procedure like? And how much would you say that Xbox Game Pass really helped the indie part of the entire thing? Because it did come into my eye before I even played it at the showcases because it was being talked about. It was really being talked about. I was a part of that entire campaign. So I want to know how much is like Xbox Game Pass pushing forward indie studios and how much should one try to get in the eye of these major publishers?
Yeah, so for your first question, the art design is all Sam Elkana. He's my art director. He's a genius. He's a big fan of Samurai Jack and Cartoon Network shows that we all grew up in. So he tried really hard to not make Venba look like those cartoons, but people still look at it and go like, hey, this looks like Samurai Jack. But I think he's Indonesian and he really pushes style and like tries to stylize assets and stuff like that. So with Venba, we had a unique challenge because we had to stylize things because that's the art style, but we also had to make sure that it's recognizable. For a lot of people, this is the first time they're looking at it. So that was one of the things we had to balance. For your next question, whether it's Game Pass or a publisher, I would say, yeah, for us, Game Pass was, changed the entire path of how we made Venba. So we were trying to look for funding. If we didn't get Game Pass, the Venba wouldn't be profitable before launch. So that made us not need publishers. And the thing to understand is like, if you do sign with a publisher, they're going to try to do the exact same thing. They're going to take you to Microsoft and pitch the game. But now when they get a Game Pass deal, they're also going to take a cut out of it, right? So I think it depends. It depends on, like, if you can get the platform interested in your game, then you can cut out the middleman. But sometimes what publishers do is like they go and do like a slate. So they have 5 games and they'll be like, all 5 games for you as like a Game Pass deal. So slates are a lot more enticing for platforms. So it really depends on how much interest you can generate for your game, and whether you can sell that by yourself or whether you need a publisher for it. Sorry, there's one person asking a question.
Sorry to excuse you. So I wanted to ask, how do you propel the game to go to the next stage while going through Venba as compared to your other games? How do you move forward with, one stage is complete, okay, now we'll go ahead with something that's to develop on to like marketing or going forward to, testing. So how do you go ahead?
Yeah, so I think it's an all-inclusive process. I think it starts from day one, or even before the idea starts. I think game development is so tumultuous. Like it changes every single day. But I think the lessons we learn are kind of universal. So for me, I think what helped was I didn't think about it as, okay, I made the game, now I'm going to take it to the next stage. I was already thinking about the next stage from day one, and I think a lot of indie developers put off marketing and publishing and even commercial viability before they, until after they make the game. But for me, like, try to get that validation very early. So if you're making something very new, like very action-oriented or something like that, prototype a lot, see if it's fun. Like, if you can prove that to yourself, then I think you can move forward with confidence. But yeah, trust your instincts and yeah. This person had a question.
So how did you went about identifying like the art director and the developer, the core team of your process of developing the game?
How did I identify what?
How did I end up identifying the right people to kind of do the art and build the game in the initial stages? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one area where I don't think there's a process. I just got very lucky. My artist is somebody I met at the company. We were working on games that we didn't want to work on. So we would always talk about like what games we do want to work on. So I think the biggest thing for me was being in a game dev space. Even though it's a mobile gaming company, everybody there wanted to become a game developer. So that got me access to really talented people. My programmer, my tech lead for this company used to be my boss. And I know they were good, so I just brought them in here. So things like that, I got very lucky. For the second game, this is when I'm also now learning the process of actually finding new people. And yeah, I'm very thankful for the team that I happened to find. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm noticing like a lot of devs in India, they have like a problem of an identity crisis. They don't know who their audience are and they're not able to, tell stories that they know or they're familiar with from their own culture because they're worried about the audience. Do they make a game which has a global appeal or do they make a game for the Indian audience? Because India has like such a rich, like diverse culture. There's so much comedy, there's so much grit, and there's so much history to it. So were you ever worried about finding an audience for Venba?
Yeah, so that was something I wasn't worried about, and I think I was very headstrong about it. Basically, video games, after the big video game crash in the 1970s, in the 80s, Americans started playing video games again because of a Japanese company, right? And we all watch anime here, right? So, and like when I grew up, I was watching anime, and like, then I would start to know about like obscure winemaking processes that's only in Japan, and for some reason I'm reading up on it. So if Japan is able to do it, I know that we can also, and we're already seeing that, right? Like I think and there's a lot of movies that try to go for like the Oscar kind of thing, and they never get it because they're trying to pander to a Western audience. But then there's a movie like RRR that wasn't made for an international audience, right? They just made what they want to make, and it just ended up working in a way that you don't expect, right? So I think ultimately it's really trust. Like I think the only thing I can say is like I really value what excites me when I make a game, because usually what excites me is, oh, this excites me because there's not a game like this before, or there's not a story like this before. So that means naturally I'm identifying a gap. And I'm surely, like when you come up with your ideas, you're also thinking about the same thing. And that's very valuable. You should hold on to that and make it unabashedly. I really think, like I didn't want to put up a slide and say, focus on, don't try to like whitewash your games and stuff like that, because I think it's even more obvious than that. Like, I don't think that's even a point that needs to be brought up. Like, the world is ready. We shouldn't self-censor ourselves. But at the same time, like, you don't have to make games from your culture just because you're here, right? Like, you can make whatever you want to. And as long as you make it sincerely, I believe, I think it will work, yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the speech. Regarding the giving minute details for the assets, so I'm a person who likes to add a lot of details into my game, even the small details. I really like it. But then is it really worth to invest all the time in it? And is there a real payback for that?
Yes. I think it is worth it. It's worth it for you. And I think people do notice, right? So, but I think it's like, I think for me, it's just I'm very headstrong about these details. And there's so many details in Venba that I'm sure people still haven't noticed. Like there's things in the Tamil, for example, in one level, Venba is making a marathon of dishes. And each level she plays a song. In that level, the song's lyrics actually describe the recipes for the game for the dishes as she's making it. Because I wanted like a musical kind of vibe. And it never, like I didn't like try to draw attention to it and stuff like that. Like I just did that because I thought it was cool. But believe it or not, there will be people who notice. Like I don't think, I think when you think about like, will this work? And does it have monetary value? You're trying to do like a backwards thing, but I'm always about, you think it's cool, so put it in and hopefully people will think it's cool too. Oh, no, you can pick it.
Can we go to
Thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask about the game's length, which is definitely an issue a lot of people have talked about. I personally liked it. I felt it was just right. But was there any time when you had to, you thought it had to be a bit longer, or were there levels that were chopped off due to budget issues?
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you brought that question up, because I think that was something that I was very anxious about. Other publishers or developers told me that, hey, your game is less than 2 hours long, so Steam's refund policy is 2 hours long. So if people can beat Venba and refund the game and no questions asked, right? So I really thought about like, should I lengthen the game? But a lot of Venba's gut punch happens because it's so short, and like there's a lot of time itself is a character, and like when time skips forward, that itself has value. So I did gamble there, and I took a risk. I think if Venba was longer, I think it would have sold more. But I will also say that I think it would have been hard for me to make the game the same level of quality if it was longer. So I'm really happy with what I did. As for the refund thing, what ended up happening was that after launch, we checked our refund rate, and it's actually lower than the average Steam game's refund rate. Which in retrospect, if you think about it, it makes sense. It's really weird to think about a player who'll buy a game like Venba, have a really emotional experience with it, and then refund it, right? So I think I trusted the players, and I think it worked out. I think that's all the time we have. Yeah.